Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, Olivier, off you go.
Okay. I was asked to give a presentation on the situation in France at the time of the youth uprising against racism and police violence. I'm going to try not to do anything like riot porn, because that will remain superficial and will not meet the political needs of the situation. First, the facts. A murder revealed to public opinion by two videos on Tuesday, 27th of June. The two videos taken by smartphones by direct witnesses of this murder made it possible to lay down bare the police lie. This disrupted the machine of lies, bringing together police, justice, and the big press. This provoked the immediate anger of millions of people in France, belonging to immigration or from immigrant backgrounds, or in solidarity with youth and racialized people. The same evening starts the riots everywhere in France. Dozens of police stations were attacked with stones and cocktail molotovs and fireworks. Idem for many town halls. More than 100 town halls had been subjected to attacks, and some had been destroyed. Some
sorry, Olivier, sorry to interrupt you. I should have done this at the beginning. Is it necessary for Olivier's contribution to be translated as he goes along? In other words, should I interrupt Olivier every couple of minutes for a translation of what he said up to that point? Is that necessary for this meeting?
I can understand him perfectly well.
So is everybody else in agreement that Olivier would continue speaking in English at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, unfortunately, we don't have the facility for all of us to speak in a few languages, so we're very grateful to Olivier to speak in English in order to facilitate our understanding of the issues. So I won't interrupt any further. Sorry about that, Olivier. I wanted to clarify this point, so proceed.
Okay. So there was many town halls attacked or destroyed. Some public buildings were destroyed or burned. Tram and buses were used for making barricades. There were some bus depots who were set to fire, and sometimes there was the appearance of lootings. These riots were generalized to the whole of France, and globally, it is said that the damages in 1 week of troubles are bigger. There are more damages in 1 week of troubles than in a month during the 2005 uprising. Unfortunately, the longer the phenomenon lasts, the more negative aspects are appearing, like looting or opportunism. But now it seems that the fever is going down. What was the reaction of power? At the beginning, instantly, they mobilized a big force of police. First 30, then 40, then 45 police officers were mobilized every night against the youth, and the media outburst on the channels run by reactionary capitalists. At least we see about 2,000 arrests, and maybe 3 people were killed directly during the troubles or through the troubles. And there were expedited trials by the justice. It is significant, it is to be noted that drug dealer networks were often operating in suburbs. Do not like riots because it creates disorder, it brings police back, and therefore it disrupts business. So drug dealers are very reactionary lawyers that oppose the mobilization of youth against racist and police discrimination. I will go to the political significance of these events. Young immigrants or people with an immigrant background supported by their parents reject racist discrimination and police pressure. It is a long story that is running for more than dozens of years of tradition in France. Anybody, as the slogan says, anybody dislikes the police, and this is true more than ever. I would like to say about Macron in power and the effect of the successive and repeated waves of mass mobilization. In 2016, Macron was not yet president, but he was already occupying position of power in the heart of the state apparatus and was relaying the demands of French capital, both at the Élysée Secretariat and at the Ministry of Economy. So in spring 2016, we have the labor law, and during 3 months, there were demonstrations and strike, and there was the beginning of mass repression of mass demonstration by the police of Manuel Valls, very rightist of the Socialist Party, who was at that time the minister of
Home Office Minister. Home Office Minister.
Yeah, police minister. In 2018, on May Day, there were incidents in Paris during the union demonstration, which brought to the surface the sale of spooks embodied by Alexandre Benalla, a young political adventurer close to Macron. The same year, in 2018, on November and December, emergence of the Yellow Vest movement, hundreds of thousands of people outside any framework of labor movement organizations mobilized for several months with demonstration on Saturday or Sunday. The driving force behind the mobilization, social justice, the high cost of living, misery, precariousness. And they meet a big repression from the power, with many people injured and badly injured with LBD and grenade. During the winter of 2019-2020, we have the movement towards the general strike on the question of pension. In December, we see the possibility of general strike very near of us. The mobilizations meet repression against strike pickets and against demonstrators. During the COVID crisis in 2020 and 2021, here again, hundreds of thousands of people outside of the workers' organization were contesting the government health policy. Certainly with the anti-vax sensitivity, there were reactionary elements, but the substance of the case was a challenge of the health policy of a capitalist power, which destroyed the public hospital, which reduced the means allocated to health, and who does things in a zigzag fashion, and who attacks labor law under the pretext of health prevention. The case of the unvaccinated nursing staff who had been laid off. Then, during the first half of this present year, 2023, during 6 months, we saw big massive mobilization against Macron's new pension reform. There were 13 days of action, that means call to strikes and demonstration, spread out between January 19 and June 6, with millions of demonstrators across France in a more big scale than in 2019 and 2020. We saw the maintenance of the union on Haiti based on the demand for the refusal of the 60 years old for retirement. And we see also hundreds of thousands of strikers to whom the union leadership offered only the choice of exhausting themselves in separate renewable strikes instead of centralizing all the energy of the workers against the government through a national demonstration in Paris and a call to the general strike. We have witnesses Macron's inability to do otherwise than resort to all the tricks of the Fifth Republic to impose his law. At the same period, we saw also the repression episode on March 25 at Sainte-Soline. It was about a demonstration against a project to set up big mega basin of water for agribusiness in Poitou. The power prohibits the demonstration, organized a very harsh repression, very serious injuries, including 2 people who were close to death because of very high use of tear gas and explosive grenades. The other day at a WIN meeting, I said that France was ungovernable. The expression is not well chosen. Rather, it should be said, what does capital need to achieve its ends in France? Answer, it needs to break the springs of resistance and protest, which means that on all subjects concerning all social strata, the projects, the ambitions, the needs of the capitalist class are contested and give rise to various mobilization. Will be told, so fascism? No. In France, fascism is an historical auxiliary of the Fifth Republic. The National Front served as a foil for the benefit of Mitterrand, which was then used by the other government on the mode we or the National Front. The FN, which has become the RN, rise from election to election, but it remains an appendage, an auxiliary of power. This Bonapartist regime is moving toward an illiberal system made up of bans on demonstration, police violence, restriction on the right to strike, and numerous gauging procedures. About the Fifth Republic and the evolution of a Bonapartist regime over 65 years. First, the birth. In 1958, a putsch with a military component, the army in Algeria, and a fascist component. Jean-Marie Le Pen was already there in the event, and a Bonaparte, de Gaulle. From this episode and the setting of the Fifth Republic, we saw the transition from colonialism to neocolonialism with the system of France-Afrique, with the installment of a strong state, but with the maintenance of some weight of parliamentarism. That was possible due to the political stature of a Bonaparte able of relying on a mass Gaullist party. This will be repeated with Mitterrand. He will be able to rely on the Socialist Party on the left to stay in power while practicing a pro-capitalist policy that turned its back on the aspiration of the workers who had brought them the left to power in 1981 to change the lives. But now it is more complicated. Macron is not de Gaulle, Macron is not Mitterrand, and even Macron is not Chirac. He is only a banker trying to have a political destiny. He does not have the party essential to any president of the Fifth Republic. The Macronist party only has a relative majority in parliament. It is dependent on agreements with the Republicans, which was the historical party of the Gaullist right. And even he could and he must have agreement with the Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen. There is a weight of the media like CNews, BFM TV, and others, held by reactionary capitalists whose symbol is Vincent Bolloré, a big magnate who made business in Africa and in the dock industry and transport. The only reliable tool for the power is the network of institutions of the state apparatus, prefects, rectors, directors of regional health agency, and the anti-riot police, as well as the ordinary police force. What are the responsibilities of the left and the labor movement? First, a basic need of solidarity with those who are suffering from oppression and exploitation. A need to defend individual and collective freedoms in the face of a power who want to push through an ultra neoliberal agenda. A need to defend an integral part of the workers' world, the lawyer of the working class from foreign background. So we think that there is a big place for political demands. So first, the resignation of Darmanin and the ousting of Macron. Macron and Darmanin cannot reform the police. Meaningful democratic advances require putting them out. And to close this presentation, I will give you the menu, what happened yesterday, Saturday, an ordinary day in France, of another day in repression in France. Yesterday, it was the call for the annual march for the memory of Adama Traoré, a young black man murdered by gendarmes in 2016 in Was, a suburb place in the northwest of Paris. The struggle of the Adama family since 2016 is a rallying point for all the struggles against police, racist police and police violences. Prohibition, then we saw the prohibition of this march in the Was under the pretext of the current situation. Then there were a call by the support committee for the Traoré family to demonstrate in Paris yesterday at 3 p.m. Place de la République. As soon there were a ban edicted by the Paris Prefecture of Police, but the organizers decided to maintain the gathering despite the ban. It is necessary to note that about a dozen of deputies from France Insoumise participated, and this provoking the cries from the right and from the Prime Minister. Then the procession was surrounded by heavy police forces, and after some friction, they were allowed to parade for 2 kilometers. At the end, Assa Traoré, the sister of Adama Traoré, was the leading person in the mobilization, saw her brother violently arrested by the police, plus some other people. And after the demonstration, the government announced the opening of an investigation for organizing a prohibited demonstration against Assa Traoré. That's ordinary life in France today, with the day-to-day repression against any kind of mobilization. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for an interesting and informative opening contribution. We dealt with not just the evolving current situation, but important historical references to de Gaulle, to the Fifth Republic, to the rise of fascism, and those people involved in the development of the fascist movement in France. So very interesting, and I look forward to a discussion flowing from that. Can the comrades, when they wish to speak, indicate using the electronic raise the hand symbol so I can pick it up on the screen? And finally, like I said at the opening, can comrades be precise and well directed in their questions and contributions? Because we welcome all contributions from all the comrades present. The more people keep their contributions restrained and limited in terms of time, the more people get come in. But more importantly than that, the more time is available for back and forth discussion of issues as they arise. So with that, as I said, can comrades indicate? Now, the first comrade who has indicated is Larry Hyatt. So I'll take you first, Larry.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Olivier, for your contribution today, outlining the CGT and other demonstrations in France. One of the points I would like to raise with you is the there has been talk of a sixth republic in France. Would this be a step towards bringing grassroots democracy at workplace and community levels? Is this demand popular amongst the left? And would this demand challenge racism in France? Is that okay? Do you understand what I'm saying, Olivier? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Larry. The next contribution is from Laurent from France.
Vous m'entendez?
Sorry, Laurent, do you need your contribution to be spoken in French with translation, or do you want to talk in English?
Translation. English, French, it's possible.
So you're going to talk in French, and we'll ask Bob to translate?
Yes.
Okay.
En France, it's France, en France. Vous m'entendez?
Ouais, on t'entend, mais c'est un petit peu, il y a un petit peu d'écho là. Je sais pas comment ton micro est.
J'ai pas de micro en fait.
Ah là, c'est bon là.
C'est bon là.
Ouais.
Alors en France, une grande partie de la jeunesse et de la population ont été choqués par l'assassinat de Naël.
Okay, so a big part of the youth and the population in France were shocked by the events.
Cet assassinat aurait pu passer inaperçu.
No, je comprends pas.
Cet assassinat aurait pu passer inaperçu. Ah.
And because they were unexpected.
En fait, c'est une caméra qui a révélé le meurtre. Sans cela, personne ne l'aurait su.
And indeed, it was a camera which brought this into the open. Without that, nobody would have noticed.
Donc, tout de suite après, très rapidement, il y a eu beaucoup de violence dans les quartiers populaires.
So, as a result, as you know, there was a lot of violence in the lower class districts.
Les jeunes n'étaient pas forcément des voyous, mais surtout issus de la classe laborieuse et exerçant de petits métiers.
Pardon, la qualité du son est très mauvaise.
Ah mince.
Les jeunes. Je vais essayer de traduire, Laurent.
Oui, les jeunes n'étaient pas des voyous.
The young people aren't thugs.
Mais de jeunes travailleurs. Précaires.
They're young workers.
Précaires. Avec de petits salaires. Précaires.
With the denied wages.
Et Naël travaillait. C'était des jeunes travailleurs.
They're young workers.
Le vrai problème de la violence dans les quartiers.
The real problem with violence in the suburbs.
C'est que cela a touché aussi la population.
It affected the whole population.
Les écoles.
Les quoi?
Les écoles, schools.
Schools. Yeah, schools.
Magasins.
Shops.
Commissariats.
Police stations.
Bus, tramway.
Sorry, pardon?
Buses and tramways.
Ah, yeah, public transport.
Voilà, public transport. Et donc, ça a pénalisé l'ensemble de la population des quartiers.
Vraiment, la qualité du son est horrible.
Ah mince, je suis vraiment désolé. Comment on peut faire? Je vais arrêter là, non?
Continue, mais j'ai du mal à comprendre ce que tu dis.
D'accord. La seule chose que je veux dire pour terminer.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Personne n'organise la jeunesse en France.
Nobody, the youth in France.
No, nobody is organizing the youth in France.
Okay, nobody's organizing young people in France.
Aucun parti politique, même le Rassemblement national de Marine Le Pen.
There is no national organization. Sorry, what was that about the Front National?
Mais elle pourrait tirer les marrons du feu de l'expérience passée.
Olivier, can you translate this? I actually can't hear it.
Yeah, so there's no national organization of the youth by any political parties from the, as well as on the left side, on the side of the workers' movement, as well on the right side. For instance, we could imagine that Marine Le Pen could have a numerous youth organization due to the weight of his electoral successes.
La classe ouvrière en France est orpheline d'un parti révolutionnaire.
The working class in France is orphaned of a revolutionary party.
La NUPES a été divisée sur cette question, par exemple, entre le Parti communiste et la France insoumise.
NUPES has been destroyed by the division between France Insoumise and the Communist Party.
L'important aujourd'hui, c'est de reposer des perspectives à la jeunesse. Et la seule perspective possible qui serait changement, ce serait évidemment une perspective révolutionnaire.
The only way in France today is to give perspectives, and a real perspective of change in France means a revolutionary perspective. Je t'entends de plus en plus mal, Laurent. Je t'entends de plus en plus mal.
Je finis avec ça.
Attends, recule un peu. Là, vas-y, parle.
Karl Liebknecht. Non, tu m'entends pas.
Là, comme ça, oui.
Karl Liebknecht écrivait que la jeunesse est la flamme de la révolution.
Karl Liebknecht was saying that the youth was the flame of the revolution.
La jeunesse en France l'a montré dernièrement. La jeunesse en France l'a montré dernièrement.
And recently, the French youth demonstrated it is still true.
Nous avons la suite à mettre.
Non, là, je t'entends pas, Laurent. Je t'entends pas.
J'ai fini.
That's over.
Désolé.
I've finished.
Yes, it's over. Yeah.
Thank you, Laurent. I don't see any other comrade indicating they want to speak at this stage. So
Do you want
sorry, Libby.
Do you want an answer about the Sixth Republic?
Well, just yeah. If you just hold on a minute, I'm just saying if comrades are going to contribute, they should try to come in early to allow the discussion to develop and to come back a second time, if necessary, rather than holding back until the very end. And there's a rush for people to speak. But in the meantime, Olivier, maybe just deal with the question that came up in the early contributions. Olivier.
So,
am I muted or can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
You can hear me, right. I recall in my own political life and my life covering some elections in France, when the far left used to get 1.5 million votes. The NPA, Lutte ouvrière with Arlette Laguerre and Olivier Besançon, who came from the Ligue communiste révolutionnaire tradition. And I also recall covering elections where Georges Marchais in the Parti communiste français got 23, 24, 25% of the vote. So where are they all? I mean, are they all dead? During some of the campaigns, recent campaigns of Besançon, for example, I believe he was successful in mobilizing a lot of young people. What's the current situation regarding mobilization of young people for the revolutionary left? And looking at it is not hugely positive. what should we do? What should the far left do?
Thank you, Dave. That's a very interesting question, and I wonder if it affects us all in all the countries in which we're active. That very question of how do you build a revolutionary left? And there are many lessons, I'm sure, to be learned from an examination of the French experience, where the French Socialist Party had all disappeared all the way along, where the left had opportunity after opportunity, the most recent one being Mélenchon, and now he has retreated in terms of support. So it's a very good question. David Hampson, next to indicate.
Comrades, apologies for coming in a little early, possibly because I'd like to have heard more from the French comrades themselves, and maybe you know, to have had other penetrating questions like Dave Hill has made, which relate to the huge changes in political structure in France, while the political institutions such as the Constitution, the Bonapartist presidential system, and every other detail is in a sense not being changed, and also in some ways becoming more repressive. And if you can contrast that to the position now, to the position which had been put in the 1960s, where you could have Marcuse and others saying that there was a kind of tolerance for revolution at that time, and it was a kind of tolerance which would diffuse the left. Now we're seeing the state actually mobilized tremendously against insurrection, against most movements and so forth. And I don't want to make the point again, but my brief experience with the French police in Nice was quite an eye-opener, because there was an American tourist trying to make a complaint against the police because he'd seen a gypsy woman being beaten up, or a group of gypsy women had been beaten by the police, and the police absolutely refused to even listen to his complaint. Even in America, they would at least write down something for that. He stood there for hours actually trying to make a statement, and they refused to accept it. So, you know, you do have such solidifying parts on the right, and there's no doubt that the police is not just a independent authority and acting judiciously in any way. Of course, we know that's not common in any capitalist society, but in France, it's apparently highly organized in unions. Well, let me use the word syndicates rather. In other words, inverted commas, but that they organize themselves and that they support each other in their brutality. They are approaching some notoriety, and so that sections of the bourgeois state, are moving very much onto the offensive and have links, very close links with the right and the ultra-right. Now, what Olivier presented was a very interesting set of political developments which help us understand the operation of the permanent revolution, or let me put it this way, of continuous revolution, in our period. Because what we see is that from the organized working class in France, there's been mounting pressure on the question of the raising the age, for retirement, and that has mobilized sections of young workers as well. I'm not so sure in relation to the most dispossessed. I can't use the word suburbs. From an English perspective, the idea of suburbs is some glorified existence. The word suburbs, as we hear it now in France, is the most disgusting level of existence on the periphery of the city, and it goes right back to the Paris Commune, and at least in the writing that I've done on South Africa, this idea of pushing the working class away from the center of town, to the periphery is the basis of segregation and apartheid. And in the same way, the French bourgeois have pushed out, the most dispossessed and so forth, and are trying to retain the center of the city, for their own pleasure and entertainment and commerce. And so there has been, can I say, a quite spontaneous reaction, which has spread on and on, apparently very localized at times, even between one dispossessed community to another, one ghetto to another, and so forth. There's been no real coordination except in spirit, except in what's happening and people reading and then taking independent action. And obviously it's, it doesn't have the finesse of politics. I mean, as we've had seen in the 1968, although that was more of an educated students' movement, we could have seen something similar spreading in one sense, in a more political sense, to places. I mean, the cities that are mentioned, I've heard on the BBC with interviews with people who've been there and part of the insurrection, has even included places like Grenoble and Lille. Well, Lille, I would have expected, maybe not Grenoble, but in other words, even small towns, I think Olivier has made this point, even small towns, it's not just a Parisian development at all, although that's where it started. The ripples or even the tidal effect has gone throughout the dispossessed cities like Lille, but also into some of the, and of course, Marseille, into all these actions. So there's continuous interaction, and we are looking forward to seeing that there is political development and political education of the youth when they see this time Macron has to some extent retreated, at least in words, while giving force to the police. Is in verbally he's taking more of a liberal position than in the past, where I understand quite open racist statements were made, not from the ultra-right we would have expected, but even from the centrist elements and the normal, well, let's say the conventional right, which is not particularly liberal in any particular way. So this uprising, I think, and let's just think about it, has accelerated the polarization, but maybe not in a uniform manner. And that's what I'd like to understand a little more, and then to be able to see how do we as socialists respond to this. And I would suggest the following, that we do not uncritically support the uprising in the sense of smashing of clinics, of schools, possibly of libraries, although I haven't heard. These are very similar to South African uprisings, where this happens. We understand the attacks on the police and police stations, and understand a very deliberate attempt to isolate the mayors and even identify them, which has brought screaming headlines in the bourgeois press and so forth. And we've understand that, but we work in every way to be able to try and unify our demands and refocus them or put them forward in a transitional manner to focus in on the reconstruction of the so-called suburbs, of the ghettos, the improvement of social services and all the public amenities on a vast scale, the improvement of access. As Olivier said, these are mainly young workers, or workers young people who are engaged in some work activity. And yet they face a daily ceiling. There's no advance for them in terms of support technically and in other ways, and to focus in on the very astonishingly elitist education system in France, which despite all the efforts in 1968 appears to have not really had any fundamental change, and is actually actively denying access to the dispossessed who are trying to be able to move into occupations which have previously been denied them. So I'd like to ask, to the extent to which workers have access to training and to the ability to become, move out of the, what can we say, precarious jobs into something approaching real working class, as opposed to, and unionized work, as opposed to, making some kind of existence. So I would like to focus or ask for how we are responding and programmatically to the demands of the youth. Well, obviously, we absolutely support the investigation of the police and to be able to, and with all due speed, so that they do not have time to get all their lawyers and so forth and to give some other explanation to any investigation, and the rapid movement onto to see compensation for the family, which I imagine would be coming on, but more than that, to have a complete reconstruction of society based on what has been identified by this uprising of the dispossessed.
Thank you, David. That's a very interesting question about the nature of the uprising and its forces that constitute it and its significance for the future. We'll bring Olivier in again now at this point. Olivier also wants to deal with this question that was raised about the Fifth Republic and the Constitution, the Gaullist control, and whether there should be a demand for a new republic and a new constitution. I think he wants to deal with that. So we'll bring Olivier in at this point to answer some of the questions that have been raised to date. If comrades wish to speak following Olivier's new contribution, just indicate with an electronic raise the hand symbol and I'll bring you in. Okay, Olivier, off you go.
Okay. The situation in France, it's if you are looking at things on a superficial way, you can be feared because, for instance, 80% of the police forces are in a union, police union. General workers are in the level of unionization in the workers' force is 8%, with all the trade unions together, CGT, CFDT, all the other French trade unions, 8% of the workforce. What Dave Hill says about what happened to the voters for the left and the far left. The question is that during the 40 last years since Mitterrand, the left and the far left was not, the left made treason by adopted the neoliberal agenda by going to social liberalism, and the far left was not able to catch all the mood and all the attempt, the expectation of the workers to change things. So we have a very serious situation with some moment where the far left was able to gain millions of voters, but did nothing with that votes. They never transform it into a significant force, and that's the problem. About the Communist Party, the question is, in 1981, Georges Marchais realized 23 or 24% at the presidential election. Nowadays, the Communist Party is about 1.5% to 2% at the presidential election, and that's the price of the Stalinism, what they did. Stalinism as well when they follow Moscow, as well when they protected Mitterrand and then Jospin and all the left government, the left so-called reformist, but these left governments were not even reformist. So there are a big differences between the social expectations of people and what the left is proposing, or what did they do when they were in power. For instance, in 2012, when Hollande gained power, the Socialist Party was in an overwhelming position. They had the presidency, they had a big majority in the parliament, they had a big part of the big cities a big part on big cities around in France. They succeeded in the regional election. But what did they do from that? They do a liberal agenda, a neoliberal capitalist agenda. They did the labor law in 2016, and then the illegitimate child was Macron. Macron was the result of what did the left did between 2012 and 2016, and we get Macron, and the blackmail is always the same. If you don't vote for Macron, then you will have Le Pen, and it's something. But the response, the answer is not go on, comrade, a big political alternative ready for election. The question is not that. The question is how to answer when there are struggles, when there are public, when there are people uprising. So anybody, so where are the voters going? You have to take in account the weight of the abstention. And Macron is very ill elected because the weight of the abstention is, I think, I don't have the figure in mind, but it's around 50% of the people who refused to vote at the second term. It's enormous. So there's no political legitimacy for all the political class. So at the same time, the labor movement is unable to organize with mass organization in the suburb, and even in workplace. The union is very weak. There are some strongholds where there are big unions, but in main part of the workforce, it's unorganized. But people are unorganized, but at the same time, they are not ready to accept their conditions. So there are many strikes where people are not very organized. They can have support from one or another union, but it's bricolage. Bob, aide-moi. Les gens trouvent toujours le moyen de s'organiser pour riposter.
Bob, are you still there?
People, yeah. People are always looking for a way to reorganize themselves. Did you say bricolage or bricolage?
Bricolage, c'est bricoler.
Bricolage is, but to me that's second-hand dealing. C'est bricoler. Non, je comprends pas. Sorry.
En fait, les gens, même s'il n'y a pas de grosse organisation syndicale,
even if people haven't got a big trade union behind them,
les gens trouvent toujours le moyen de s'organiser avec les moyens du bord pour faire des grèves ou organiser des protestations.
People will always find a way to organize using whatever comes to hand.
So the question is that for the left, there is no way with the institution of the Fifth Republic. And that's why Mélenchon raised the question of the Sixth Republic. But we are in disagreement with the question of Sixth Republic, because the way Mélenchon is using it is to have some a Bonapartist continuation for a rebuilding of a true democratic republic. And that we said that we need to destroy the institution, to destroy the state, and on the basis of a constitutional assembly to rebuild another regime. And that's the difference with all the stuff by Mélenchon about Sixth Republic. But at the present time, it's not the big problem. The big problem is how to have a position vis-à-vis the government. For instance, on Thursday, there were a common call by many organizations, anti-racist organizations, trade unions, association, left parties, about a set of demands. And the question was how to deal with these demands. And the weakness of that call was that it was calling upon Macron and Darmanin to reform the police. Macron and Darmanin can't reform the police. They can't realize democratic achievement for that question, because they are linked to the police and they are resting upon them to keep in power. So the question is, we must put forward demands, democratic demands, social demands, but in a way that the political question is a clash with the power. And so the question is to put down, to oust the power, not to have we can make the power way back, but we can't have a deep solution with them staying in power.
Mm.
Thank you, Olivier. Now, if Cromwell's wish to speak, they should do so. We're fortunate to have activists directly from the front line in the French events. Now, you won't get that opportunity on Sky News or on Twitter. So Cromwell's now wish to ask questions about what's actually going on in France, of people who are there and up front in the struggles. But anyway, you can ask any question or make any contribution you think is relevant. So please indicate soon. Harry, so your hand is up there.
Well, comrades, the question is what's to be done at this time? What's the immediate threat now to the working class? And we know the response from the Macron government. They've tightened the law, subsequent arrests, well over 3,000 people arrested on the streets. The brutality, I know there's been violence from the protesters, which is significant, but the brutality of the police and the attitude of the police in arrests, crackdown, Macron using the law, also whipping up far-right agitation, leaning on the far right now, particularly Le Pen, racism, fascists in the police, and to whipping up far right. So in other words, from this, as far as the authorities are concerned, it is more repressive legislation, more repression from the state police, and moving towards a far right agenda and strengthening the far right. To put forward demands to this government, I think is going to be completely worthless. Reform of the police, youth reforms, it's going to fall on deaf ears. They're not going to listen. We already know what they're doing to crack this down. And I think this poses the immediate question, what does the left do? It's a predominantly youth movement. And what I think first of all needs to be done is that needs to be broadened out with appeals to the working class and the trade union movement, that they need to become much more involved in this movement. But the real question is dealing with the threat of the far right and the government. And the only way you can do that is to organize in the working class areas, identify the threat. It needs committees, it needs workers' committees set up in all of the workplaces, as many as possible, and in society as a whole. Organize, identify the threat, organize committees, and to be honest with you, the threat, which is an armed threat, in many ways, you should be looking at an armed working class to defend themselves. Because these committees, when they take out onto the streets, are going to be subjected to the same state violence that they're going to have, but also far-right thuggery. There's fascist vigilantes already going around Paris attacking working class people. That it's organisation that is the immediate, not demands put to this government. We need organisation to defend the working class, and to also to build a movement that is going to go on the offensive against this Macron government, smash the state, and take on the fascists.
Thank you, Harry. It's an interesting question about formation of workers' militias, which I'm sure is what you had in mind. It's an interesting issue to examine. Next, we have Roger, followed by Ed.
Yes, Comrade, I only want a very short contribution, but I think we should certainly give note here, take note here of the fact that there is no country in the world with revolutionary traditions that come anywhere near to equaling those of France. And the reason why we have such why it's constantly on the boil is really it goes right back to 1789 and the French Revolution. And we saw throughout the 19th century, we saw again and again those mobilizations and uprisings. In 1830, of course, in the Paris Commune of 1871. Then again in the 20th century, I'm not going to give a long list, but obviously 1968. But then we saw in the 21st century the mobilizations of youth, the uprising of youth in 2005, and again now 2023, and even in the last few years, the gilets jaunes movement, the movement in protest against the new pension laws and so on. And what we see in France is a tradition of spontaneity and volatility, and that's why, to an extent, we have to put into that context the weakness of actual organized labor in the terms of trade union membership and even political party membership. For instance, in 1968, there were only 3 million who were organized in trade unions, but when the uprising began, 10 million workers occupied their workplaces, many of them with red flags. So they identified with that revolutionary tradition without having necessarily been organized in unions, let alone political parties. I think we have to say that is the strength of the French working class, but it's also its weakness, that it can constantly erupt in these kind of insurrections and movements. Until it can consolidate that into a program of revolution, then it's always going to simmer away and boil away and evaporate in that way. And that's why, for instance, also politically, we see it's something we see in every country, of course, particularly all over Europe, that the traditional workers' parties are in a state of complete collapse. For instance, I was shocked to see in the last few days that in Germany, the SPD has been overtaken in the opinion polls by the racist AfD, and that's only obviously it's true all over Europe that the workers' parties are in a state of collapse. But particularly we see that in France with the almost the disappearance of, as Olivier said, 1% and 2% for the Communist Party and the Socialist Party, who were, after all, not so long since the Socialist Party were in power. A complete dissipation, complete disintegration of the left parties, the formation of very strange, episodic, ephemeral movements like Mélenchon's party, which doesn't seem to have any solid organization or any clear perspective or program. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe Olivier can correct me. But therefore, I just think we have to put these events in that context, that the task is to actually mobilize on the basis of that tradition of radicalism and revolution, but actually to sharpen up an organization and a program that can actually lead to victory.
Thank you, Roger, for an interesting point, and it links back to what Dave Hill was talking earlier when Georges Marchais was a serious contender in the French presidency, along with the combined work with the Socialist Party. So it's not that long ago. So it's worth looking at the traditions in the way Roger has explained here to see where all this is coming from and why it's in a different situation now than it might have been, say, a couple of decades back. After Ed, can comrades indicate if they want to speak? So Ed, you're next.
France is without doubt the classical country of revolution, and revolution is really very much part of its recent history. I think particularly the spontaneity of the French working class is connected with the fact that many workers in France, many workplaces in France, are prepared to take industrial action without being members of official unions. I was on a general strike in France in 1973, and the whole of my workplace came out on strike because I suggested it to them. There weren't a lot of people there. I mean, it was not a big, it was a small place, but every single person, including the manager, said, yeah, we'll come out on strike, not because we were in a union, but because there was a strike taking place. And I said, it's wrong to work on the day of a general strike. So because there aren't trade union bureaucrats operating in so many workplaces, and that allows the spontaneity, the workers' gut feelings, their sort of anger and their solidarity to surface without so many complications. With the movement of 1968, I mean, they've made some interesting points, some good points, but I think it's important to realize that although the press portrayed it as a student movement, and in many ways it was young people who were the catalyst for that movement, at the height of that movement, and the reason the European bourgeoisie were terrified of it is because 10 million workers were on strike, not just students. It was a mass strike movement, mostly of workers who were not in trade unions at all. The only other point I want to make just in relation to the discussion is that there's been this discussion about the use of the word suburbs in relation to where the especially in Paris where the opposition to the government is, and suburbs doesn't ring well with English speaking people because it implies a leafy sort of middle class area out of the centre. It's probably better to think of something like big areas where there are council estates and tower blocks. What you might call in America, you might even call it ghettos. That's probably a better translation, even though it doesn't match exactly geographically. But those were the point. I mean, I think it's a very good contribution that Olivier made, opening up the discussion. And I just wanted to add those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Before we ask Olivier if he wants to comment to deal with some of these points, are there comrades who wish to raise questions or make additional contributions at this point? Okay, Olivier, you might want to make some remarks about the more recent contributions.
To grasp with what is happening in the working class today in France, you must have in mind that, for instance, what was the workers' movement, the trade unions and the left party during the 70s or in 1981 when Mitterrand took the power is not at all the same. The Communist Party and the Socialist Party are no more as big as they were at that time. They are mainly party made of elected people in the member of parliament, municipal councillor, regional councillor, stuff like that. And even, for instance, even if the Communist Party is some kind of militant force, it has not at all the place it had 4 decades ago. And at the same time, the trade union leadership were able to have a breakage of the base, but at the same time, they can survive with the financial contribution of social dialogue and social partnership. So with the contribution, the financial contribution from the state, from the European Union, and from various channels like that, they are able to live without members, because they have money from the states or from the European institutions. So it is critical, it is vital that we find the way to have real mass organization at the rank and file level. And at the same time, things could change very quickly. If we could have one general strike of 1 week in France, no something like May 68, no, just 1 week of general strike in France, I'm sure that in the following weeks we could have a mass arriving of people inside the trade union. But the question is to shake all the institution of the state as well as the institution of the labor movement. And at the present time, what is the biggest enemy of rank and file organization? It is the leadership. It is the top of the organization, and that's what we are facing in everyday activity. For instance, I am working inside the CGT. What is very striking is the fact that I think the most part of the militant forces in France inside the labor movement is inside the CGT, but at the same time, the way of living of the bureaucracy is so softening the things, so quite no war, no, or when they are more militant with people from combative Stalinist tradition, they are not making things in a deep way. They are making circus, but the main point, the dividing point, in my opinion, is the question of the attitude vis-à-vis of power. If you try to have big successes, big successes with democratic demand or social demand, in the framework of the actual power, it's a big mistake. It will never happen. If we want to have advance, we must shake the power and bring them down.
Thank you, Olivier. I'll just ask a question myself. Olivier might deal with it later on. Ed and myself went to Paris some years ago to a conference of the Parti Socialiste de Gauche, PSG, led at the time by Georges Sally, and it seemed very positive. I mean, Ed could bear us out. The conference was a combination of left-wing socialist, community, immigrant peoples, very, very positive, and looked very promising, the future development of the left. My question is, what happened to that process? Now, not too specific, there's obviously specific issues about leadership and so on, but are there general lessons to be drawn from the experience of that left development in the northern suburbs? I think it was Saint-Denis where the meeting was held, if I remember correctly. But again, it's other lessons to be looked at there in the emergence of the left. So Olivier might deal with that. Now, if there are other questions, can comrades indicate? I can see Dave is going to speak, but does anybody else wants to speak? Okay, so we don't have to drag the meeting out either. Just because we normally go on for longer, it doesn't mean we have a responsibility to wait till the last minute comes and then ring the bell and finish. If comrades don't want to make further contributions, we won't let the meeting just drag on. So the only indication we have now is David that wants to come in again, which just take him in a minute, followed by Olivier's final contribution at the meeting. So this is your last opportunity to make a name for yourself. So does anybody else want to contribute? Okay, so we'll take David Hampson's contribution and then Olivier's final summing up, if that's agreed by comrades. Is that okay? We don't normally finish this early, so that's okay. Okay, so we'll take David, followed by.
Well, comrades, it's really, 2 points and 2 questions. One of the points that I've heard in the discussion on all these events on France is that France is the most diverse nation in Europe by far. In other words, it has more of an immigrant population. It has more diverse religious persuasions and or a more diverse sort of social outlook. And that this is something which the Constitution, let me not talk narrowly about the express Constitution, but let's just say the popular concept of citizenship is meant to deal with. In other words, that France is meant to be the republic which has arisen out of rejection of feudalism and any form of theocracy. And so it is accentuating everything around the notion of citizenship rather than culture. And that this is the entire discourse that I've heard by commentators has not dealt with the social side and the police and and the state, but rather that this youth is challenging the idea of citizenship and insisting on greater diversity. Now, this is a kind of abstract way of, in a way of looking at it. But on the other hand, the idea of the of citizenship, as opposed to different cultural formations, is a very powerful concept. It seems, at least in terms of conventional politics. I wonder if, Olivier, if you could consider this in terms of, first of all, this notion. I mean, is it true that France is such a diverse society? And then to what extent does the idea of citizenship and the absolute equality, which is meant to be associated with citizenship, actually, what is the politics of this at the moment?
Thank you, David. So before Olivia speaks, see Dave Hale wants to speak again. So, okay, Dave.
So I will reply first to Finn about the Parti Socialiste de Gauche. The Parti Socialiste de Gauche was a very teeny and very local split from the Socialist Party in Saint-Denis, and I think it faded and it disappeared. I didn't have any news about. I made some research and I found nothing. So I think it disappeared. About the nature of the French society. Yes, now I think there's maybe at least 20% of the French population with racialized. It means that the question is very important to have a unification of the society to avoid the growth of racism sponsored by the National Front or all the far right media. So first, why there are so much migrants in France or people from foreign background? Because first is because France is a rich place. Nobody is going to migrate where there are no work, no hope for better. So first is a sign of the France is rich. Secondly, is the heritage of the empire, because now with the history of the French colonial empire, we have links with people from North Africa, even with Algeria. Algerian people are the first foreign or French. Most of them are French. The first group of people from foreign are from Algeria, despite the war. And maybe it's in relation with the war, because the French police was built upon the struggle against the FLN and the guerrilla. And then we have immigration from sub-Saharan Africa. But now we have many people from many places. European, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Chinese, Latin America. You can find anybody of foreign background everywhere in France. 40 years ago, you can find black people or Arab people mainly in the big cities, but now you can find black people, yellow people everywhere in France. So what is funny is that despite the success of the National Front in the election, there's there is racism, but at the same time, is not big enough to divide the working class. People are aware in the workplace that if they are going too much into racism, they will do the job of the bosses. So I think the bourgeoisie could make big victory in France if they were able to redevelop a mass racist movement. It will be the best way for them to divide the working class. Or if they were able to develop a reactionary movement around the question of all around the place of women in society, with freedom of abortion and all that is a connection with women's sexuality. For instance, around the 2010, the right and the far right were trying to develop a movement called La Manif pour tous, who was an homophobic movement against the gay union, and they were able to gather sometimes 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 demonstrators in Paris. But now all this vanished, and there's not any rest of that. So So the problem for the French bourgeoisie is how to divide the working class, and it's the best option for them. And I think they had a lot of work until they succeed in that reactionary way. So on the contrary, we had a lot of work to unite the working class, and in all the question between French people, foreign people, women, men and women. And so about the question of citizenship, we can have in mind what was the regime in Algeria when the war of liberation in 1954 when the war began in Algeria. Formally, Algeria was not a colony. It was a full part of France with the same institutional and the same law as in the rest of France, in the metropolitan France. But there were institutional divide with the Arab people and the native people from Algeria. And that was unworkable because the inequality, the discrimination were not manageable. And all the colonialist party in Algeria at the time did all the best to put oil on the fire. And they never had a clever reformist attitude. They put the fire and they provoked the National Liberation War. So the question today of citizenship is not for us is not to return to what was the political regime in Algeria before the war. Bon, c'est un peu exagéré, mais it's something like that. Because we must implement real equality, real freedom, real equality. And for instance, the words of the Republic in front of the town hall is liberté, égalité, fraternité. And we can do revolution on that three words because it's still had to be implemented for real things, for anybody else in France.
Thank you, Olivier. Dave Hill, you indicated earlier you wanted to speak.
Well, I did, but the time is. I think Olivier has summed up. So
Okay.
the point I was going to make in 2 sentences was that despite their lack of left organisation in the unions and in political parties of the far left, and indeed of the left, the French have been, because of the revolutionary tradition that a couple of speakers have mentioned, remarkably successful in stopping some aspects of neoliberalism, privatisation, and they've kept a lot of their social benefits. So there's a bit of a conundrum there, the difference between organisation and tradition. Yeah, that's the point I was going to make. But Olivier, who summed up, and I want to thank you all. Interesting meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I just want to support that. I thought the contributions were of a good level, and it was a very informative and comradely discussion, and we all will have benefited from it. I want to thank Olivier for his contribution, of course, also Laurent. Some time ago, we had a meeting of Wind Comrades in Paris, and we came across a leaflet which Mélenchon's group had issued. And the main demand on the leaflet was "Prenez le pouvoir." And is that not what we're all aiming for? If only that demand was followed through by the left parties when they had the opportunity to take the power, they didn't take the power. So with that, thanking you again for your contributions and for making the meeting an interesting meeting. So Roger, did you want to say something about future meetings? Because it's probably a break coming up now.
Yeah, just next week we've got a comrade from Turkey speaking about the situation there after the re-election of Erdogan and all the implications.
Thank you, Roger. So with that, that's it. We've finished the meeting. So bonsoir to everybody. So we'll see you all next week.
Good evening.